Alright, another one of these asides. So this is going to be about the Roman military structure, and I'm going to cover the entirety of the Roman military structure because why not, you know? So when Rome first started, being that it was like, nearby a bunch of Greek colonies, it was partial towards the Phalanx style of combat, which, if you don't know, is they would have, I think it's about 8 men deep worth of spearmen who would use big round shields, and they would use an overhand hold, which, when the Romans would use their spears, they would use it underhand. Um, the so they would hold the spear, and they would all stand close so that your spear is over top of the shield of the guy to your right, and thus the guy on the farthest right is supposed to be the most experienced because he has no one covering his right side. He has to cover the right side of the guy to his left, but he has no one on his right, so he has to be really good. Yeah, so they would do that, and what they would do is they would pack them so tight, and they would train in pushing up against each other so that they could actually push forward through the enemy line. Because how you beat a phalanx, since it's such a dense population of men, and since it's very well armored and very well protected, you'd really just be able to push through, and maybe once you get farther away from the starter point than your opponent had there, constantly on the retreat, if things go well, they would turn and retreat. And this was known in Greek as the turning point, and it's actually the word that we get that from is where we get the word border. They would put a armor trophy, the actual word, of one of the people who had died at the exact point where the enemy phalanx turned and ran, and that is how the Greek city-states would determine their borders. Because, if you're able to push to a certain point, then that means that is as far as you can hold. Smart. Yes, so when the Romans used this phalanx, they soon went up against the Samnites, and the Samnites were a hill tribe in the Apennine, and so a phalanx in at least Greece, and even in the Battle of Pinda, where the Romans beat them using this very same feat, when it goes up against a hill, because they're so tight and people can only move so fast. People who are on a lower elevation can move faster than those who are on a higher elevation, and if you're going uphill, you're likely to have the line bend and get all distorted and that type of thing. So you're very likely towards getting your holes exploited by the enemy infantry, which is what the Romans did. And so the Romans, being super, adaptive, while at the same time super conservative, Rome is very much a country of contradictions like that. Yeah, so doing all this, they they decided, look, this phalanx isn't working. We can't make it up into the hills when we can't even fight in the hills. So what they moved towards was called a Maniple System, and a maniple is 120 men total. I think it's something like 12 long, 10 deep, something like that. And they would do this in a checkerboard formation, which is called triplex acies, which means 3 lines. And so the first line, well, the unofficial first line, it's not really the first line of infantry, was called the Velites. Velites are like skirmishers, and they're kind of the poorest grouping. So this is pre-Marian Reforms, so everyone has to be land owning, and so the Velites are the poorest people. All they're really able to afford is some javelins and maybe a very light wicker shield. So what they do is they go up to the enemies, they throw these javelins. And the intent of the javelins is not to kill. The intent of the javelins is to get stuck in the enemy shields, and then they have to drop it. And so Velites, they extinguish all their javelins. They would back up through the gaps in the line, the checkerboard line, and they would fall back. And the first line after them were called the Hastati. Now the Hastati are the first line of real sword infantry. They had some armor, not much. Many of them, it wasn't a requirement, but they were the first to have a real tower shield, a scutum, as the Romans would call it. And so they would have the scutum, the gladius, the sword, and they would go in like that. And they would also have a helmet, galea, they would, all that type of thing. And so, yeah, they'd be the first in line. And being, first in line, they were the greenest of the green, other than, I guess the Velites, but, the Velites are not really infantry. So so the Hastati, being the greenest, they go in first, and they go up against the enemy first to try and like weaken them down. And then once they started getting tired, the next line, the Principes, or I guess this comes from like I guess this comes to Prince, and it's also the same root that Augustus's title Princeps was from. It just means the first. So they were like the first real infantry. They were the first heavy infantry because they had a full set of armor, they had swords, shields, all that good stuff. So they'd go in, and the Principes would go in through the holes that the Hastatis had left, and the Hastati would fall through the holes that the Principes had left. Perfect. And so then the Principes are fighting and going up against the enemy lines and whatever like that. And so they've already been softened up by the Velites, they've already been softened up by the Hastati, and they're already fighting over a bunch of their own people. They're really tired, they haven't been able to switch out, they're just not going to be able to stand up against the Principes. And that's the intent, And if the Principes get tired and the enemy's still hanging around, then the Hastati would step back in, and then the Principes after them, and blah, 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 blah. And I bet you're thinking, where does the third line come in? Well, the third line is called Triarii, or in singular, Triarius. They're the actual spear infantry. They're the most veteran of the legion. And so, you start with the Hastati, you go into the Principes once you get more money, and then, you're in the Triarii. Your Triarii doesn't really matter about, like, their cost, because they get, the best material because they're the most veteran. They're expected to be the leaders. And being the most veteran, they were also the most likely to want to fight. And also being third line, they were also the least likely to fight. And so a lot of times in protest, they would sit down on their shields at the back of the line, just watching their soldiers fight. And there was actually one occasion in which the Triarii was able to join in the combat, and this was at the Battle of Trevia River. And at this battle, Hannibal sent his infantry and cavalry around in a little dried up creek bed, and they jumped up from the creek bed, they went back around the Roman line, and they hit the back of the Triarii. And so the Hastati and the Principes that were in front of them were breaking at this point because they're attacked in the back, they're attacked in the front, they're attacked on the sides, they're pretty much done. So they break, and all of Hannibal's infantry coalesces around the Roman Triarii, but the Triarii don't give up. The Triarii make a valiant last stand and fight until the last man. And what else can you say? They're the most veteran, therefore they are the most likely to fight to the longest, which is proven by this. So after the Maniple System, this is also why the Marian Reforms happen, because if you think more beyond just the theoretical, like what happens if they go into a war like this? They have 4 different types of infantry that they have to outfit differently with different sets of gear, and they all have different levels of training. They're all different classes of people. There's so many differences between them. Like, how do you get unit cohesion? What happens if you lose more of one than the other? If you call for reinforcements, what if you have too many Hastati and not enough Principes, or you have too many Triarii, too many Velites, or something like that? Then you're done. Your formation is all over. What are you gonna do? And so what Marius did, or Marius, he said, that the Romans shouldn't have to arm themselves for war. It should be the general or whomever raises them. It should be their job to provide the troops with not only their pay, but their uniforms, their food, all that good stuff. And so that was the first real professional army, and that was done in 102 BC or 651 AUC. Yeah. This is called the Cohorts Formation, given that it's made up of 10 different groups of infantry, so-called cohorts. And the first cohort was the most senior, the most prestigious of the 10 cohorts of a legion, and it was subsequently the largest. I think it's 160, something like that, but only 120 combatants. 40 of them were slaves that would they would work with the pack animals, and they would barrel the gear, set up the camp, make the food, all that good stuff. And then each subsequent legion, not legion cohort, 2 through 10, where they would be about 100 total, 80 combatants, 20 of those same pack slaves. And so this works out a whole lot better, then the soldiers are not having to make stuff for themselves. The camp train is part of, the legion. They have the training, they have the weapons. If they get attacked, they're not just gonna like give up and the Romans are, SOL in terms of their supplies. Yeah, so like going from that, this makes it a whole lot easier to reinforce as well, because if you need more troops, you just bring on however many cohorts you need. Problem solved. You can run a line from there. It's easy. The Romans can still use the triplex Achaeus with this. But not in terms, but they'd have 3 lines that would rotate instead of just 2. Yeah, so they can still run in the same formation. They can still use the same like styling, but the way that the legions are organized would make it so that they can very easily, move troops over to different legions, transfer between points even on the battlefield, and all they really have to do is just know where they're going. They all speak the same language. They're all trained equally and in their own unit as the cohort, so then the cohort can work in itself wherever it is on the line, or wherever it is in a legion, or on a front, or wherever. And so that's the third like real change to the Romans. There were some changes to the actual like stylings, armor, and weapons that they would use in the Empire and late Empire, but they'd still use the cohort formation. They'd still use the cohort organization. They'd still be in this set of styling. So there you go. There's the 3 stylings of Roman military and how they would go about combat.